Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. I want to welcome you to a little extra segment that we are introducing the end of this year during this podcast, which I'm so grateful to have Anna Brooks with us here today from Lifeline Australia, who is the Chief Research Officer at Lifeline. And today I thought it was really important that we discuss, coming into the festive season, how we can support one another and each other during a time that can bring up a lot of issues for people, whether that be emotional, whether that be mental, whether that be in family situations where there can be a lot of pressure this time of year. And sometimes we can forget about that when we're singing Christmas carols and watching all the Christmas movies. But there is often sometimes a deep feeling for some of us to feel quite alone and feel quite misunderstood at a time where we're supposed to be happy. So welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
It's, as I said, a pleasure to have you on and to really start this conversation with what you do at Lifeline. And that's where I want to lead the start of this conversation today is, for those people that are not aware, what do you do and what does your role as Chief Research Officer look like at Lifeline Australia?
Thanks, Ashley. Look, and I'd like to also begin by just really, again, thanking you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I find that having a role at Lifeline Australia, which is I guess for want of a better term, the national office for the Lifeline network, which spans the entire country. We've got 43 centres across the nation, is a real privilege. It's an organisation that's been around for 61 years now. We started as an organisation because there was a vision of a person named Reverend Alan Walker that no one should face their toughest moments alone, that there should always be someone to support people when they're really doing it tough in their lives in those moments of crisis. From there, we developed a telephone support service that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That has been sort of the consistent service that we've had as an organisation in those 61 years. But we've since then also built a lot of services around our not only adding to our crisis support offerings, but also a bunch of other services, including our self-support toolkit, counselling services, and community services that we offer from our centres across the country. So it is an organisation that I'm really proud to work for. My particular role as Chief Research Officer is to, I used to be an academic, Ashley. So, I've my whole career has been in the broad area of psychology, and I trained as a researcher and was sort of at the coalface of generating new knowledge in sort of labs in Australia and around the world. From there, I've moved into this role where I actually get to draw on those research skills. But now what I get to do is work with researchers, connect them into the Lifeline environment. And what we do together is we identify gaps in knowledge around how it is that we support people experiencing suicidal thinking. So we generate new knowledge, do research projects, get data, draw conclusions from those data, and we generate insights that help organisations like Lifeline to make sure that we're providing the best possible supports for people to try to reduce suicide in Australia. So that's the bulk of what I do as the Chief Research Officer. I also use the evidence base, so make sure that, what we do and speak to as an organisation, our advocacy activities when we're talking to government or to the community, I make sure that when we are making, I guess, taking positions on particular topics, it might be something like cost of living, that we're speaking from the evidence base. So all that we do, it's a way of us making sure that as an organisation, we're engaging in sort of best practice. We're using the most recent, the most relevant knowledge to make sure that we're providing the best possible services to Australians.
Incredible and so needed when we look at how much mental health statistics and suicide has increased. And I hate often drawing on statistics because these are humans, these are people that we're dealing with. But when we do look at the data, it has increased. And I do want to talk and touch a little bit on that. You mentioned in your research, trying to find the gaps and then putting that to Lifeline, for example, and saying, okay, how can we improve? Within your research, what are those gaps that you are identifying?
Yeah, look, there's different areas, but I think the thing that I would say, the thing I think it might be most important to share with your listeners is that through research and by improving the evidence base, what's become clear. So we're an organisation that's focused on suicide prevention, right? That's our reason for being. More than 3,000 Australians each year die by suicide, and many more than that make attempts on their lives. And of course, for each of those tragic deaths and attempts, there's a ripple effect to the people around those people who are experiencing suicidal thinking. So the impacts, it's an issue that we really as a nation need to address. And one of the key, I guess, for want of a better term, enablers for us to address suicide and reduce it is by better understanding the causes. And I think one of the areas in which there's been rapid development, and this is a real, this stuff is hard to talk about, right? A lot of it's really tragic, and it really takes a toll even talking about it at times. But if I were to point to some real positives, I think through, as I said, the evidence base, we're getting a much better understanding of some of the contributing factors. We know that there's a lot of social determinants. So people used to talk about suicide and suicidal thinking as being largely a mental ill health issue. What we now know, we're very confident of based on the evidence, is that mental ill health can be a component, but it isn't always. And for a lot of people, there's a bunch of social determinants that actually really are important factors in them reaching the stage of suicidal thinking. So things like, a history of child abuse and neglect. That's one of the factors that can contribute. Situational factors like relationship breakdowns, transitions, major transitions in people's lives. So, becoming unemployed. In the case of, we've recently had a Royal Commission into defence and veteran suicides. We know that involuntary, transition out of the armed forces is another risk factor. But it's an example, I suppose, of this broader point that those transitions in people's lives, often ones that they do not want, can be a real situational stressor that contributes to suicidal thinking. And there's related issues like, financial distress, relationship breakdown often means that there's, division of assets, and that can, lead to financial distress. Those sorts of factors all can contribute to someone, engaging in suicidal thinking and or attempting and or taking their lives. So we are developing a much better understanding of the broad range of factors that can contribute to suicide. And that really helps us, because what that means is that we can use that knowledge to inform our services. So just, a sort of concrete example is that we know financial distress is a factor. So organisations like mine, Lifeline, we not only do we have our sort of crisis support services to really help people in the moment who are doing it tough, but we also have things like financial counselling that we offer out of our centres, so that we can address some of those factors that actually, can contribute to ultimately to suicidal thinking. So we get to use that knowledge, apply it to deliver services that we hope that we know, based on the evidence, will help reduce some of the stressors that can contribute to suicidality. So, that's a real positive development in what it is that we as an organisation do, but other organisations as well. There's a range of suicide prevention services, and what we try to do is to work in as complementary a way as possible to ensure that not just through Lifeline, but through all of the services in this space, we're better serving the Australian people.
I find this so interesting when you touched on that mental health conditions are not the only factor. And I think for a long time there has been this understanding that if you're suicidal, you're mentally ill. And I think I agree with you so much without understanding the research myself or being in this space. But but having a broader sort of awareness of the people that we work with at the Secret Burden, it can sometimes come from this irrational thought to just get out of something as quickly as possible. And you mentioned you've been doing this, like, not yourself personally, but Lifeline Australia for like 61 years. And within the research, have you seen that that has changed? And why do you think, if it originally started from people developing these mental health conditions, say from pre-exposure to trauma and things like that, but now it's turning into more of a, as we mentioned, like a quick out to get out of stress. Why do you think, if it has changed, it's come to this way where we personally feel we can't deal with stress?
Look, I think I would say, Ashley, that the thing that's really changed is our understanding rather than necessarily, the sort of the root causes. So I think, look, one of the, some of the most, I guess, powerful models, the best models of sort of the contributing factors to suicide, touch on a few concepts, like I guess psychological concepts, but um, that what those models touch on is the idea that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, suicidal thinking involves a sense of hopelessness, a sense of burdensomeness, and a sense of entrapment. So feeling like there's no other option, feeling like people, very sadly, all of this I say, really advisedly, because this is tough stuff, and this is what a lot of people are going through today, tomorrow, sadly. Um, Feeling like their families would be better off without them. And again, that entrapment is, touches closely on hopelessness, feeling like there's just no other viable option. They're often hallmarks of suicidal thinking. And something that I'd also share with you is that it's really important for those of us who, aren't at this point in time experiencing suicidal thinking, that it's very hard for us to sort of put ourselves in that position of I guess, understanding those thought processes that are going on for someone who is experiencing suicidality. So, I guess an example of that is that people often wonder, how, why, like, this is someone who was so loved, who's attempted to take their life. And for the suicidal person, the thought process might touch upon that issue that I just raised around feeling like a burden, that people would be better off without me. So I think that's something that's really important for us to understand, because that understanding brings with it, I guess, one of the consequences of that. And this is something that for example, the National Suicide Prevention Task Force, in a report a couple of years ago, made a point very strongly around, is that what that should lead us to do as a society, not just service providers, but as a broad society, is take a compassionate approach to how we respond to people who are experiencing suicidal thinking. So compassion in our response, providing safe spaces for people to express that they're experiencing this thinking, and a number of other things, like ensuring that people have access to peer workers, people who have been in that position before and who have good insights into the sorts of thought processes that can be involved. All of those things and more form, I guess, the basis for a compassionate response to people who are engaged, who are experiencing suicidal thinking. So, look, I think, as I said, I think it's not so much that the stressors that can contribute to suicidality have changed. I think what is happening is that we, as a sector and as a society, are getting a much better understanding of how it is that people, what it is that can lead to suicidal thinking, and how we can better respond to it.
Do you think that we can still do better? I think that there is this, as you said, the awareness is there and we're talking a lot more about it. But do you think people within the community as such still need to have a better understanding? Like, we're not fully there yet?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Look, I think organisations like Lifeline and many others have been actively engaged for a long time now in trying to reduce stigma. And a good example, Ashley, a simple one, but I think a really sort of evocative one is that we used to, and this is not language that we would use, today, but to make the point, I'll use this language. We used to talk about people in inverted commas committing suicide, and that's something that we would never do today, and there's a very good reason for that. Committing, that word, evokes, its connotations of crime and sin, which is what the view of attempting or taking your life by suicide used to be. That it was literally a crime. It was considered a sin. There were a bunch of, I guess, practical sort of consequences when someone did take their life by suicide. Legal ones and religious ones. Today, that we no longer use that word to reflect the fact that our thinking has evolved. So now, again, better understanding the mechanisms, and having, I guess more broadly, as a society, more compassionate and understanding responses to things like, and I use the umbrella term mental ill health, but also suicidality, which is, as I've already noted, there's some overlap with mental ill health, but it's not complete. I think that is definitely, like, we've made progress. We've made a lot of progress. People are more willing now, I think, to share, to engage in help seeking when they are doing it tough. We've got great advocates, people from the business world, like real high flyers in business, people from politics, people from entertainment, movie stars, all those. Like, we've got a lot of people who are now sharing that they've had, their own issues. And I think all of that is grist to the mill as we continue to try to reduce stigma and get to the point, hopefully, where people find it as comfortable and normal to talk about experiencing suicidal thinking as they do to talk about, having, had like a purely physical ailment, something, like they're dealing with, I guess, maybe it's anyway, I won't list it sicknesses, but us getting to the point where we can talk about suicidal thinking as openly as we can about physical illnesses, is the ultimate destination. We've still got some way to go.
Do you think if we talk about it too much and we hear all these celebrities talking about it and speaking of their stories, whilst a great conversation and needed, it could potentially lose its significance?
I think it's a possibility that, with familiarity, comes, I guess, as the old expression goes, can come a little bit of contempt. But I think, on balance, the benefits that come from us reducing stigma, normalizing these conversations, far outweigh any risk. I think it's not, none of us, I will use a physical, like, illness now as an example. Cancer is not, we talk about it a lot. We're much more aware of cancer these days, of the different types, where, like, it's something that, sadly touches nearly all our lives, as either as someone who's experienced cancer or someone who's supporting people who have experienced cancer. I don't think that, that necessarily makes us blasé about it. So I hope that the same applies as we get better as a society about talking about mental ill health, and suicidal thinking.
I only hope so too. It's great that, as I said, the conversation is really starting and people are sharing more stories and it's becoming quite relevant. So I am hoping that it is going to better our awareness, and not just on, I think, a simple surface level range, and people really want to actually invest in how they can better not only support others but themselves in this space. And that leads me then to, this ideal about what is a personal crisis. And I know Lifeline is big on that, in helping people when a personal crisis does pop up. But what is that? Like, what is the definition of a crisis in someone's life?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ashley. And it's one that's really pertinent to us as an organisation because we talk about being, our 13, 11, 14 service. So that's the telephone service that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we also have chat and text services that are also 24/7. We talk about those being crisis support services. And then the obvious question for some people is, well, what does crisis mean? Do I actually qualify to use that service? Bless their cotton socks. People worry that they shouldn't be using the service unless they sort of qualify to have a crisis. So they're wondering what that sort of threshold is. The way that I try to describe it to people is crisis is different for everyone. But the way that I try to think about it is that it means, when your coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, when you don't feel like, you're coping well, you're not quite sure what to do next. You're feeling a bit overwhelmed. They're good signs that crisis support, is going to be a service that's useful for you. I really want to encourage people also to think about, even if you're not sure that you sort of that those that fits you. If you're not sure but you're still thinking about wanting some support, call Lifeline. Our crisis supporters are highly trained. They're highly trained in sitting in the moment with people. They'll support you no matter what's going on for you. They will listen and provide practical tips and connections where appropriate. But please don't ever worry about being a burden to Lifeline. We're there to support people experiencing distress, crisis, feeling overwhelmed, also people who are just not sure if they should be calling us. So I'd always say, if you're thinking about it, it's probably worth giving us a call.
I think that's really important to note. And as you sort of mentioned, that crisis can mean something different for everybody, and that intensity can be
Mm-hmm.
different for everybody. So someone that, might be seen as experiencing something that's really intense could, need to call Lifeline, but someone that it might not be intense, but it is so overwhelming where they can't turn to, say, healthy coping mechanisms in that moment. That's
Yep.
when they also need Lifeline. So I think that's really important to distinguish that there is no criteria,
Yep.
because so often we think about that when it comes to reaching out to help services, is
Yep.
that I'm not bad enough or I'm not sick enough.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And again, like I really, on the one hand, you really respect people for wanting to make sure, that they're sort of that in inverted commas they qualify. But equally, what we're trying to do is get people to support earlier. Intervention is Lifeline's always here for it. It's a core of what we do. But so supporting people when they are in crisis, but also, as like sort of more broadly, in suicide prevention and mental health services, what we're trying to do is to encourage, anything that like we, I guess that we can think of as being prevention. So engaging in help seeking earlier, so that we don't hopefully we can help people so that they don't end up in that really pointy end of experiencing a crisis. So early is good, but we're there. Lifeline's there. We're there from early right through to supporting people who are in an acute crisis.
And I mean, when people do ring up and want to talk to someone at Lifeline, what are generally the outcomes after that conversation? I know all situations are going to be different, but is it leading someone to then seek support, or how does it generally work?
So when you contact Lifeline, I'm talking about our crisis support services here, voice, chat, and text. What our crisis supporters do, you can be completely anonymous. You don't have to share anything. So you don't have to share any personal identification information, not your name, not your age, nothing like that. You can if you want to, but you certainly don't have to. No appointments necessary. And as I said, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So people often experience, distress, crisis, in the middle of the night when there's no one else to talk to. And that's where, Lifeline always being there is, I think, of just such phenomenal value. What it looks like in that contact is essentially you've got a highly trained crisis supporter who is there to be in the moment with the person experiencing distress, or the person using the service. So whatever it is that is on your mind, the crisis supporter will engage. You will experience, I mean, it's very skilled support like that's based in befriending. So it is a non-clinician. It's not about clinical. It's not about diagnosis. It's not about assessment. It's about feeling heard by another human being in the moment. So and that has enormous value in and of itself, because for a lot of people that experience of being really heard is not something that they often have the chance to experience. But on top of that, I guess essential element of what it is that we do in providing human to human connection and hope through that is that the crisis support is also looking for opportunities to, where appropriate, the crisis supporter will de-escalate, help the person de-escalate. Also practical tips and connections to further services if it's appropriate. So, for example, I used the financial counselling example with you before, Ashley. If the person's like one of the core sort of issues for them is financial distress, and that's something that they don't know how to resolve, then the crisis supporter might provide information about a financial counselling service that's appropriate for that person. So those practical supports are also part of the experience of contacting Lifeline. But the key ingredient for your listeners to be aware of is that you call Lifeline and you're going to be heard by a non-judgmental, highly skilled human, a peer, another Australian, who is for 13, 11, 14 as an example, who is volunteering their time because they just want to make a positive difference in other people's lives. So I guess that's how I'd best describe it.
And it's phenomenal that we have people out there that are volunteering their time in order to support other Australians that are really struggling at such a pivotal time in their lives. Like, my hat goes off to those people and the work that you guys are doing, because it is so important. I know even myself, going through my own personal journey, having that person there in that time where you don't want to burden anyone and you don't want to share it because you feel
Mm.
so much shame and judgment, but to have someone there that just listens and just supports and meets you where you're at is
Yep.
so important. And that's why I'm even, I've looked at the research and the data and how anonymous support has increased, like the demand has increased for people like yourself at Lifeline. And I'm interested on your thoughts and why you think that having this anonymous support network or this intervention where it's completely confidential,
Mm-hmm.
rather than finding a friend or finding a medical team, or whilst all very necessary, why do you think in times of crisis, anonymous support is becoming increasingly demanding?
It's an interesting question. I think that the look, often people, we can be in a crowded room and still experience loneliness, right? Like, it's not necessarily about whether you have social connections or not. It's about the quality of those connections. And sometimes, even if we have good quality connections, we don't necessarily feel like the really the hardest thoughts, some of the thoughts that we might be ashamed of, that we're really struggling with, we don't know how to frame them in any sort of way that we as individuals think is necessarily like sensible, maybe for want of a better term. um, I think in those situations, knowing that there's a service available where you can say the stuff that you're sort of maybe feel ashamed or scared to share with people that and are going to have to engage with on an ongoing basis is a really powerful thing. So you can get it off your chest to someone you're never probably going to talk to again, who doesn't know you, and that just reduces the barriers, I think, to engaging in help seeking. It gives you that ability to share those really tough things that are on your mind, and to know that there's no judgment. I mean, that's a promise from Lifeline, but also that there's no sort of implications for your social connections on an ongoing basis. You're sharing this really important stuff with a stranger. That's a way of reducing the barriers. The barriers to people who maybe thinking about engaging in help seeking but aren't quite sure yet. So that's a really important part of what it is that we do. And I also think, Ashley, just that the 24/7, the fact that you can call Lifeline any time of the day or night, and it's no appointment necessary, it's free. That's incredibly important as well, because as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes it's in the wee hours, when our thoughts can become overwhelming, and so it may be that at 2 o'clock in the morning, picking up the phone to a friend who you know is asleep, just it like that can be another barrier. So that aspect of Lifeline always being there, ready to talk whenever it is that you're feeling like overwhelmed or in distress, I think is another incredibly important part of what we do.
And I think it's also pivotal to mention that it's a free service. And
Yep.
I think we often think that there needs to be this exchange, and we stress about that we can't afford this, or we can't make time for this. But this service is here for you when you need it,
Yep.
free to your expense. And I think that that is so important, because often we don't opt to, I mean, we talk about support networks, and as I mentioned, like our teams and who is in your 5 friend groups and who can you call
Mm-hmm.
upon for this. But support services like hotlines don't really get a mention unless, as we talk about it, it's like, all right, you're in crisis and you need to deal with this in the now, which is I get while they're there. But also to have that support network is, if you cannot turn to anyone, they are
Mm-hmm.
available, and they are available with no judgment.
That's exactly it, Ashley. That's exactly it. And look, oftentimes too, it is the case that you Lifeline might be the safety net. It's there, and you use it when you're really doing it tough. As I mentioned, that sort of scenario in the middle of the night. But you also then engage with your friends, family, whoever your support mechanisms are, maybe at a different level. But you might be able to have that sort of complementary approach where you're using Lifeline as a key support mechanism, but you're also maybe talking to your GP or your other aspects of your support network. It's not just it's not like a one size fits all, and oftentimes people find it useful to have various different support mechanisms that they're relying on to get them through a really tough phase. So that's a good thing. But at a basic level, if you've got no one else to turn to, you don't know what to do next, Lifeline's always there. And as you say, it's free, no appointment required.
That's so great. I want to talk a little bit about, we mentioned personal crisis and getting to that point, what can lead people to there, but how can we also support ourselves to prevent us from getting to that crisis point? I know it's going to turn up in different situations, but if we do talk about the festive season, a time when I think sometimes we get lost in the idea of everyone's supposed to be happy. And
Yeah.
as I mentioned earlier, it's like Christmas carols and it's family gathering, but it's not always the case for a lot of people. And it can actually be a really hard time, like the worst time of year for a lot of people that are feeling, whether it's isolated from their family, from their friendship groups, or just not feeling part of this culture that we have created to be on
Yeah.
this high all the time, this period. And how can someone really navigate this period if they're not part of, they're falling more into feeling more alone this time of year?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. And look, just to reinforce what you've said there, for a lot of us, we're very fortunate to find this a time of happiness and relaxation with people that we love, and festivities and all sorts of fun things. But it's also super important for us to acknowledge that for an awful lot of people, that is not the experience at all. That it can be incredibly isolating, incredibly lonely. There are people, who don't have others, to connect with in that way. And there are also people who have others around them who actually, make it, the interactions can be really challenging and make it a really tough time of year, just because of interpersonal relationships. So the experience of this time of year is different for different people, but I think it's really made particularly tough by the sort of contrast effect that for a lot of people this is just joy writ large, right? Like this time of year. So if you don't feel that way about it, it can feel very isolating. Um, in terms of what people can do about that, if this is a time of year where they find it really tough, one of the sources of information I'd really like to direct your listeners to is our self-support toolkit. So you can go to the Lifeline website. And you'll find a toolkit that has lots of information about a range of different topics. You can navigate to topics based on how you're feeling. You can navigate to topics based on, in a number of different ways. So we try to make it really easy for people to land on the information that's relevant to them. And within the tools that we have available via the toolkit, we actually have information specifically about the festive season. Some of the big, I guess some of the descriptions about the variety of experiences that people go through at this time of year, but also practical tips on things that people can do to try and address some of the challenges that can arise based through loneliness or having really tricky family interactions. So for people who don't feel like they're connected, then examples include like volunteering, making sure that you've got processes in place that give you the opportunity to feel engaged in ways that suit you. It might be that you've got a local coffee shop where you go for meetups, with people once a week. It might be that you're volunteering for a pet shelter. It might be that you take if you've got a pet, that you take your dog to the local park at a certain particular time of the day, and you're engaged with the other dog owners at the park. So we've got practical tips to provide people ways to, I guess, plan for how they're going to engage and feel connected over this particular period of the year, along with with other practical tips. But certainly there are things that people can do, steps people can take to be, I guess, proactive in trying to manage some of the real challenges, the real challenges that come along with everything that's happening, at this time of year, Ashley.
And I really want to emphasize that incidental connection. I don't think we give that enough credit. I think we have this idea that connection needs to be, with a family at a dinner table or with a group of friends or going out with our running group, when sometimes, as you mentioned, those incidental connections can tick that social box for you, whether it's, as you said, going to the park with the dog or going grocery shopping and interacting with the teller there, or
Absolutely.
finding ways to incorporate that in your day where, I mean, even like sometimes I find myself just going around to shops and just walking through the shops, being surrounded by people,
Yes,
hearing different
absolutely.
conversations instead of being stuck in our home environment sometimes, which is not always going to be beneficial for ourselves. So I really want to emphasize how important those incidental social interactions can be as well.
I 100% agree with you. I think, the example you gave of, even doing the grocery shopping, and it could be that you don't actually want to, have a conversation with anyone, but just being around other people, seeing, I guess the pulse of life of other people doing their thing, that can be incredibly, have a real positive effect for a lot of people. So yeah, I think it's about recognizing, taking the time and thinking about the things that actually do, work for you and have a positive impact, and then looking for opportunities to engage in experiences that give you the chance to, I guess to have that positive impact. And, going to the coffee shop might not be that you want to talk to the barista, but sitting there with your book and listening to other people, having their conversations and seeing that sort of the hum of life, can be something that, really is a positive thing to do.
And finding what works for you is
Yep.
so important, because as you said, these toolkits are amazing, and I want to emphasize like they're guidelines as you try things and you see what works for you and what
Yep.
doesn't, and see what sits well, and when it does, utilize that. I think that's very important, and I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation today. Like, I'm so grateful to have you on, and just so appreciative of the work that Lifeline Australia do for so many Australians around this country. It's so important, the work that you do, and it's not recognized enough. And I'm so grateful. And I want to thank you, part of like our community, but also the Australian community, for the work that you're doing in this space to really help Australians when they're struggling the most.
Oh, Ashley, I'm very touched. Thank you for saying that. I think, look, the crisis supporters, those volunteers who are on the end of the phone or chat or text services are just, to me, they're absolute heroes. And it's a real privilege to be able to, to work with those people, and to support the Australian public. So thank you very much for your kind words. And I really would just like to say to your listeners, please, if you're experiencing distress, crisis, or you're not sure, but you think you might like to reach out for support, please contact Lifeline. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're there.
Amazing. And where can people, I know there is that number, but website, phone number, where can people reach Lifeline if they want to in the crisis moment, or even just learning more?
Yeah. So 13 11 14 is our phone service, and through our website, there's a landing page where you go directly, to the chat and text service. So you'll get all the information there. So please check out our website, which is www.lifeline.org.au.
Amazing. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And
Thanks, Ashley.
everyone else out there, thank you for joining us for another Secret Sunday session. No, there is support services out there for you. There's always someone around that is willing to listen. It's just having that little bit of courage to dial that number, send that text, and someone will always be on the other side of the line. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you guys all next time.